Welcome, everyone, to the inaugural episode of Visceral Reactions, your weekly, brand new podcast discussing horror movies. It's
Two horror movies.
Twice the horror movies.
It's a double feature.
I'm your host, Matthew Tremenis, and this is my co-host.
What an excellent day for an exorcism.
Quinton Williams, joining me to discuss two movies every week until you get tired of us.
Until we run out of ideas.
Yeah, whichever comes first. For our first week's episode, we have what many would consider the horror movie. And definitely what I would consider my favorite horror movie of all time, 1973's The Exorcist. But with a twist, because today we're going to be pairing it with a lesser known, brilliant in its own right, film by one of the masters of 1970s schlock horror.
Oh, it's so 70s, and it's so schlocky.
Larry Cohen's God Told Me To. And if you are picking up what we're already putting down, the theme of this week's episode is possession. So we will be dealing with the subgenre of religious horror.
Whoa.
But before we do that, there's the issue of God that we need to get out of. We need to clear the air.
What's wrong with God?
Exactly. So, April 8th, 1966, Time magazine published what is probably still to date their most famous cover of all time. The first time in the publication's history that there was only text on the cover, and it was a black backdrop with red lettering that simply asked, "Is God dead?" And I bring this up because this question captures perfectly what's happening in the country at this time. In 1966 and in the late 60s, you have this period of the world literally and metaphorically erupting, not only into flames, but into change. You have political assassinations, you have the Vietnam War picking up, and this overall sense of godlessness taking place. You have the red menace of communism spreading throughout the world, and part of that menace is the idea that this threat is without any theological sense. And so we have this growing belief of non-belief throughout the late 60s that essentially erupts at the end of the decade with the Manson family, showing that no one was safe, that not only was the American family at risk of seeing death via the news footage of Vietnam, but now all of a sudden the threat of godlessness was right outside the door. And there are a couple of moments where these feelings become put into text. None better in the 60s than Rosemary's Baby, both Ira Levin's novel and Roman Polanski's film. And that opens the door to go from a sort of abstract sense of evil to something way more tangible with William Peter Blatty's novel and William Friedkin's adaptation of The Exorcist. And there we get a direct confrontation with the devil himself. So this, surprisingly or ironically, for a film that was deemed satanic by Billy Graham and televangelists all over the country, it's hard to find a film that's more affirming of Christian theology than The Exorcist, because it speaks to the reality that Christianity is a tool book for the average soul's guide to battling evil on not just a daily basis, but like on a moment to moment basis. And that's something that Friedkin firmly believed going into the film, that this, even though it's about the devil taking hold or a demon taking hold of a 12-year-old girl, it's supposed to be about the battle that all of us face between the moral struggle that we deal with on a daily basis of how and when to be a morally upright person, and what happens when you fail, what happens when you lose sight, when you lose faith, when you are at your weakest moment and something takes a hold of you. And for the Exorcist, that something is an ancient Mesopotamian demon named Pazuzu.
Pazuzu.
Little Pazuz.
The film also answers the question, if science fails, religion answers.
Yeah, that's so one of the many themes that we're gonna try to discuss today. I think is one of the most interesting aspects of the film is that it really shows that pretty much every institution fails a family in distress, whether it's medicine, the law, or even the family unit itself. That the thing that saves Reagan McNeil from the devil is a Catholic performed exorcism.
Technically, punches also help.
Yeah, but
we'll get to that.
Yeah. So, but this is throughout the course of the film, as we see demonic possession go from rats in the attic to eventual full-on transformation, we see that there are no answers. And this is what makes the film perfect detective story.
Yeah, kinda.
Like, all of the characters in the film are asking questions and trying to figure out what's happening. The viewer is asking the same. We're trying to figure out how this ancient Mesopotamian demon that's seemingly unearthed at the beginning of the film by Father Marin, who's played by Max von Sydow, would end up going from Mosul in northern Iraq to Georgetown in Washington, D.C., and ending up in the home of a Hollywood actress and her daughter.
We don't really get an answer.
And that's one of the most fascinating things about
and terrifying.
Yeah, exactly. That
it could happen to anyone.
It can happen to anyone. This is jumping ahead a little bit, but at the very end, when Father Damien Karras, who's played by Jason Miller, when him and Father Marin are walking up the stairs to go into the bedroom to perform the exorcism, the two of them discuss the fact that they don't know why this is happening to this girl.
It's one of my favorite scenes.
It's beautiful. And in that moment, paired with the conversation that the two of them have after it seems like the exorcism is not working, Father Karras, who has been dealing with a crisis of faith the entire film, wonders if what the devil is doing by taking hold of this girl is showing us the absolute worst of humanity. And interestingly enough, Friedkin looked at that moment as showing that even the most innocent object, even the most innocent soul in the world is corruptible by the devil himself. And that if he could get the best of us, then that means none of us have a chance. Anyone listening to this, anyone who watches it,
the most pious and religious human being on the planet
is susceptible to the reach of Satan. Regardless of whether you believe in anything theological or not, the idea that everyone has this common denominator of vulnerability to evil is something that unifies us in a good way and in a bad way. And I think that's one of the broader messages that the film has, is that any of us could be doing something terrible, whether Satan guides your hand or not. We have this dilemma of figuring out why young Linda Blair would be the one to become a host to Pazuzu, who's not even named.
No.
In the first film. I mean, unless you read the novel or unless you watch The Heretic, the sequel, you don't know that it's Pazuzu. And
all you're given is a vague statue that appears twice.
Yeah. And it's funny that one of the ways that you gain power over a demon is by knowing its name. And so how effective is the battle at the end of the film if you don't even know the demon's name? And that's something that we can get to later when we discuss the full-on exorcism even more. But I guess that it's safe to assume that everyone should know what the plot is.
We can dive through it a bit, mainly to talk about some interesting things that I want to talk about.
Okay, we can do that then.
First off the bat, I have to ask the question, is this the scariest movie ever made?
I guess it depends on what terrifies you.
Yes.
If you were to look at your personal susceptibility to evil at any given moment, especially for audiences that have any inclination towards believing in God, which at the time that The Exorcist came out in 1973, close to like 95% of people in the country said that they believed in God. Not necessarily that they were religious, being like church-going folk, but they were believers of something higher. So you have to imagine all of those people sitting there in these theaters in 1973 and just seeing this little girl be transformed into this monstrous shell of a person. To answer the question, it's not scary.
Because despite the fact that for any promotional things we've ever seen about it or like heard about, a large majority of the film is just people talking.
Yeah.
It's like Jurassic Park or Jaws. You hardly see the dinosaurs or the shark.
Yeah.
There's not a whole lot of Pazuzu in it.
No. And that's, I think that's for the better, because you're spending, if you're watching the director's cut, you're spending 132 minutes. 120 of those minutes, you're building up to the exorcism. And so you know that it's coming. You see Reagan getting worse and worse. You see the demon taking hold, and you keep waiting for the moment for everything to go batshit crazy. And you get these small moments, whether it's the spider crawl down the stairs, or honestly, what I think is the most disturbing scene in the film is when Reagan gets the arteriogram.
Yes, very realistic
Yeah.
depiction of the arteriogram.
Like, so realistic that NYU med students were like, they were shown that clip because like that was as good of an example as you were going to see.
No one had ever seen that.
No.
You don't just...
I close my eyes every time that scene is on. I can't watch it. Like, I was just watching it earlier today, and I had to peek through my fingers to wait until
I went, ooh, yep.
That makes my stomach curl. But aside from that, all of the terror comes from watching a family being torn apart.
Because the scenes where we get the slow transformations, the scenes of like the bed shaking or things flying across the room, they never last more than like 5 minutes.
No, and pairing that with subliminal images
yes,
of Captain Howdy.
3 times.
Yep.
One is
above the stove.
Yeah, that's the second time. The first time is when Jason Miller's character is having the dream about his mother.
Yeah. And then
the stove. And then towards the end, yeah. This is going ahead. I want to quickly talk about the makeup in the film done by Dick Smith, I believe.
Yes.
Of course, the Reagan makeup is phenomenal.
Yeah, between what to say about how, I mean, by the time Reagan says, "What an excellent day for an exorcism," the way that she looks with
The cracked lips,
yeah,
the almost putrid green skin and all the cuts,
like her
eyes.
Oh my God, the adorable 12-year-old in the beginning of the film who is making little clay figures and was asking for a horse is now the pure embodiment of evil. This just discarded vessel for Pazuzu. The makeup it's just, for those who have always thought that is pea soup that is coming out of her mouth and nose, spewing up all over the priest. Interestingly enough, it's porridge with food coloring.
I always thought it was pea soup.
Because it looks so much like pea
It's
soup.
so green.
Yeah. So that it, and the reason why it's so green is because the food coloring of pea soup, whatever green that is, I don't want to know what Crayola name that is.
Why does the mother keep feeding her pea soup while she's possessed by
why
a
all
demon?
of this pea soup? Like, you should probably not.
She looks thirsty. Her lips are cracked.
That's, oh my God.
But all that being said, not the actress / actor in the film with most makeup on their face.
No, that would more than likely, I think what you're getting at is Max von Sydow.
Yes. How old do you think Max von Sydow is in this film? Judging by his appearance.
So Father Merrin, I believe, is supposed to be in his 70s.
Yes, and he looks it.
Yes, because the makeup between his hair being brittle, like,
thinning
wheat, I would imagine, looks like that, and his skin just looks like he's about to just perish in the dust. Max von Sydow, I believe, was in his 40s.
44.
Yeah.
I did not know that. Because I've seen older Max von Sydow, and I'm like,
he's been old. He's passed now, but he was old forever.
I know, and I'm like, you must have either aged gracefully, or what is happening here? And then I looked it up. I'm like, oh, it's makeup.
You figure when he's starting to work with Bergman in the late 50s, he's a young guy. He's a really young guy. And you fast forward like 20 years to The Exorcist, he's still pretty young. But if you only watch The Exorcist,
he's old
as dirt.
Older than the sands of Iraq.
Yeah. So, this is something really crazy that I learned in the director's commentary of the extended cut. While they were in Iraq filming these scenes, the only way that they were able to get permission to be there, because at the time the United States and Iraq did not have,
still do not,
have the best relationship, but the Iraqi government told Friedkin and told the crew, you can film here, but you have to use locals for extras, which they did, and that dig site is real.
Yes, it is an actual real place, a real dig site. They were actually digging up, not the crew, not the actors, just archaeologists.
Yeah. Not only did they have to use, local people, they had to teach a select group of Iraqi filmmakers how to use the equipment and how to make fake blood. Now you have to wonder.
What the fake blood? There was no fake blood.
Exactly.
What's the point?
I don't know.
That's fine.
What the Iraqi government was doing. Why, it's like, I heard that and I was like, that's very suspicious. But that might be the most terrifying thing about all of this, because to have a group of government trained filmmakers who know how to make fake blood, sounds like you could use that for.
It's fine.
Yeah, I'm sure nothing ever came of that.
I love the fact that, first of all, we're talking about the extended cut, the version you've never seen.
The version you've never seen, which pretty much everyone has seen by now, because it's more available. Like if you were to watch it on streaming, more than likely you would see.
You're not really missing out much watching the original version. But with the extended cut, there's the added 2 seconds that conveys everything what the movie's going to be about. It shows the house in a religious statue.
Yeah. And that statue will...
Simplicity. This film is simplistic, but there's so many little moments.
It's effective. It's everything is effective and nothing is wasted.
The bit where the clock stops.
Yeah.
That's eerie.
Yeah. It just all of the details building up to the demonic explosion of having every object in Reagan's room flying about.
Do you think that particular scene helped inspired Steven Spielberg to make Poltergeist?
If anything, it was there in the back of the mind of how do we do this?
Exorcism did it better. The commenting for Poltergeist isn't the best in that scene. But also, another thing that it may have inspired, the scene where Reagan's mother's named Chris, right?
Mm-hmm.
When it's in the opening, is that right after she's doing her film shoot? She's walking through the street with the leaves blowing, and they have the tubular bells playing the first time. Only happens 2 or 3 times. Interesting enough, for an iconic bit of music, isn't really in there. Did that scene inspire John Carpenter
with Halloween?
They are very similar.
Yeah. Again, I would be surprised if it wasn't. I mean, everyone saw The Exorcist. So whether it was intentional or not, that moment, especially to have the iconic music with the autumnal scene in The Exorcist and then transport that to the iconic music and the autumnal scene in Halloween, I wouldn't be shocked if John Carpenter saw that and was like, that's a really good idea, especially because that moment when Chris is walking, that is one of the few moments, if maybe after that, nothing's ever the same.
Slowly cascading down.
Yeah. That's one of the few moments where everything is okay. You don't know, especially the first time you watch it, you have no idea that moment will never happen again. You will never find that peace, because after this, it's hell on earth. Mm-hmm. Speaking of the makeup, one of the most subtle things that freaks me out every time I see it, as you're going through the film, and Father Karras becomes more and more embattled with his crisis of faith. Mm-hmm. By the end, in that chilling light, which was mostly natural light, they tried to film the bedroom at the end with as much natural light as possible. His face, by the time you get to the moment where Pazuzu takes hold of him, the merger of their faces is almost identical. Like the bone structure of Captain Howdy, the paleness of the skin. Like
Jason Miller has a particularly interesting facial structure.
Yeah. And
and then you get the green eyes.
Yeah.
I see that scene, and it almost reminds me of Bill Bixby in the Incredible Hulk TV show, because they have a similar dark hair and facial structure. Like, oh, it's Bill Bixby.
Yeah.
He's about to turn into Lou Ferrigno.
Well, I mean, he kind of does when he starts wailing on Reagan.
Which is, like I pointed out earlier, the actual thing that saves the day.
Yeah.
Not the exorcism, not God punches to a 12-year-old girl. You just got to beat the devil out of her.
You know, God doesn't always tell you how,
in mysterious ways.
But he gives you the tools, and you just have to know when to use those tools properly.
Jason Miller is interesting. All the cast is, because it's mostly a ensemble of unknowns, which the studio was very much against.
Mm-hmm.
But Blatty, who was the producer, all this wouldn't have happened because of him. He was adamant about not only unknowns, but Jason Miller. And it's interesting. Jason Miller's interesting because he wasn't an actor. He was a playwright, very good playwright. That isn't to say that he hasn't done maybe some theatrical roles here or there, but he's never done film.
Yeah, he's not the person that Warner Brothers would have.
They wanted someone like Jack Nicholson.
Yeah, which in the early 70s, nobody was hotter than Nicholson. Maybe Warren Beatty, but there was a connection between Blatty and Jason Miller, because when Blatty ends up doing an adaptation of one of his other novels, The Ninth Configuration, he cast Jason Miller again in a role that is...
Was that after?
Yeah.
I remember reading that he read the book and he's like, that's me. Because Jason Miller was training to become a Jesuit priest who had a lapse of faith.
The involvement of both religious and medical figures in the film for consultants added to this cinema verite feeling of knowing that pretty much everything that what you're seeing in terms of medicine or theology, textually, definitely, is true.
At the time.
Yeah. The way that the doctors handle Reagan, the way that they talk to Chris when trying to figure out what's wrong, looking at the x-rays, all of that. There were numerous members of NYU's medical faculty.
Yes, they
who
were actually
on set.
Yep, actually there.
To make sure that it was done correctly. And there were at least 3 reverends who were also there to make sure that all of the God stuff was right.
The other priest in the film, whose name I forget, who was there giving Jason Miller his last rites.
Oh, Father Dyer.
Yes, he was an actual Jesuit priest.
Yeah. Father Dyer is wonderful.
Not very priest-like, with him slipping into his room, quote unquote, the dorm room, and is like, here, have a bottle of booze.
Gives him a bottle of what, like Chivas Regal?
Something.
And he's like, not very priestly of you. Yeah, the moments where priests are given their humanity, whether it's alcohol,
cigarettes.
Yeah, they're just any sort of, not even an indulgence, but just showing them doing something other than a sermon.
Not being so uptight and rigid and like, can't have any of that.
Yeah. So like, the moment where the absolutely wonderful Lee J. Cobb as the detective, Lieutenant Kinderman.
If you haven't seen 12 Angry Men,
Lee J. Cobb is fantastic.
He's so stern yet so warm.
Yeah, he's the audience member, I think. He's the person who's trying to figure everything out, and doesn't know what the hell's going on.
Detective story.
Yeah, and he can be charming. I mean, if you want to look at maybe in a movie that is filled
with subtle moments,
maybe the most subtle exchange is after Burke Dennings, Chris McNeil's director, is killed by being thrown out of Reagan's window down the famous Georgetown steps and having his head completely turned around. Lieutenant Kinderman goes and talks to Chris. And that Kinderman thinks that Reagan did it. But he never says it. He doesn't have to. Because the way that he questions Chris McNeil, he practically performs Inception on her by getting her to question whether this 12-year-old girl could have thrown a grown man out of a window. Because obviously it's something that no mother wants to think of their child. But Kinderman, who has nothing else to go on.
He has no evidence. He only has a hunch.
Yeah. And so what do? You take that hunch and you try to plant a seed. And you do it in a way that at the end of that conversation, when he asks for an autograph, she doesn't spit in his face and kick him out of the house. That Lee J. Cobb just turns on that big smile of his.
Because he's not a bad guy. He's just doing his job.
He's doing his job. He's trying to figure things out as much as everyone else.
He's not pointing fingers.
Yeah. He's not
explicitly.
Yeah, he's not harassing.
He just wants, a man has died and he wants to figure out what did it.
Exactly. And just the the little jokes that he has with Father Karras of like, do you want
to see a movie?
You want to see a movie?
He's got Audrey Hepburn, Catherine Hepburn. I've already seen it.
Yeah, and it's stuff like that. Like, Kinderman shows his his eye for detail when he meets Karis for the first time, and he says, "They told me that you were a boxer."
You look like one.
Yeah. Like he noted, like he's watching him running around the track, and he sees his physique, and he's like, "Yeah, absolutely. Like you're built like a fighter." You know, later on when he's investigating the steps, he finds the clay figure from Reagan's room, which is like the same color of the steps, and somehow he picks it up.
And in a middle pile of leaves.
Yeah. There's no one. I
know he was brushing his foot, so we're like, what's that?
And that figure does look a little bit like the Pazuzu head.
I thought it was.
That would have been.
I'm like, how did they get hold of that?
Which, that's the question. If that had happened, it wouldn't have been the craziest thing, because if Pazuzu can go from this hole in northern Iraq to Washington, D.C., which is the same path that the St. Joseph necklace takes, that Father Marin finds, and then at the very end, Reagan has, that Chris McNeil has, it just goes to show that in this world now, it is not impossible for something to be everywhere.
Was wanting to mention Iraq earlier, but we got sidetracked a bit with other amazing things about the film. There's something so amazing and so terrifying about the fact that this entity is from the Middle East and is in this ancient grave site that probably predates Christianity.
Yeah.
Something ancient and hidden and buried. Something about that is just terrifying.
Well, it provides this scope of what you're up against. Like it makes the entire situation seem even more impossible. And in terms of how are you going to win? I mean, I don't think it's inappropriate to view this struggle in terms of winning and losing, because whenever good and evil are discussed, it's always versus. So like we have to look at the film as this like giant main event fight in like Madison Square Garden, and
anyone can win, anyone can lose.
Yeah, and the respect that good and evil show towards each other.
That scene where I quoted, "What an excellent day for an exorcism." Yeah. Where it's just Pazuzu and Father Karras talking. It's my absolute favorite scene in the entire film. I love that scene because it's not scary. It's just a conversation.
Yeah.
There's something about conversations in film like that I just eat up.
I think it's because of how real.
Yeah. They're just talking.
Yeah. Like in that moment, and part of what makes it terrifying is that when either priest is alone with Reagan at the end, they're talking to evil.
Yeah.
Like they're talking to evil itself. And it's so normal. And when Father Marin tells Karras to leave the room after his little slip up.
"You're not my mother."
Yeah. No matter what iteration of Satan you ever see, the trickster aspect is always one of the more interesting ones. And the way that Pazuzu manipulates Karras and not Marin, which is very interesting.
Because it is interesting because they've run into each other before.
Yeah.
The bit where he did the exorcism in Africa.
Yeah.
Pazuzu.
Yeah. So I think there's a bit of reverence that Pazuzu has for Marin.
Almost like a respect.
Yeah.
It's like, we've done this dance before. Who's the new guy?
Yeah. Anyway, it's like Jake LaMotta and Sugar Ray Robinson.
Sure.
Of just like two fighters like who go at it numerous times, and it's always back and forth. And Marin has something of a winning record because he's still standing. And when the film begins, Pazuzu is the one who's in a hole.
Yeah.
So for Karras, who is emotionally vulnerable because of his mother's passing, in addition to his already having this crisis of faith
Pretty sure that crisis of faith cleared up real quick when you saw the bed levitate.
Yeah.
It just hones it in further with a really powerful scene of when they're just shouting, "May the power of Christ compel thee."
Yeah.
That tenseness in their face is just so good.
And it's see that this is one of those like really, I guess it would be easy for someone watching to think like, oh, like the power of Christ compels you is the thing that like you're supposed to say over and over again. In the book of the rite of exorcism, whatever phrase you happen to be saying that shows any sort of effectiveness, the book says just keep saying it. Like if you notice that what you're doing is working, just keep spamming it. It's and so, in that moment, Reagan is levitating in this beautifully blasphemous rendition of the crucifix, in the way that she has just, it's just laid out like she's on the cross. And once they see her start to descend, they start shouting it.
It's something beautiful about it.
Yeah, because it happens. Not only does she rise so gently,
she falls gently.
Yeah, and whereas like every other time she does something demonic, it's always violent.
Yes,
she's either just spewing out pea soup, or some of the most horrendous things that you could ever have a 12-year-old say to you.
Yes.
Throwing furniture, objects.
Mom.
Yeah, like...
Which the actress actually got injured.
What? Ellen Burstyn, did she break a rib?
I think she permanently damaged her spine.
That's what it was, yeah.
And Linda Blair got hurt.
Yeah, no, that's right, because they
on
had...
the bed? But when they were pulling her?
Yeah. Yeah, no, she had that brace on with... Yeah, that's right. It permanently messed her back up because they yanked her. I think what it was, like the guy who was doing it kind of like didn't let her know how hard he was gonna.
Yep.
And she got caught off guard.
And William Friedkin kept those exact reactions.
Yeah.
He's a bit of a... William Friedkin's part of the new age group of Hollywood directors, but he's also very old school when it comes to certain things to get visual reactions.
Yeah.
Because he would fire blanks to give Jason Miller a shock of surprise and things like that. He slapped the other priest actor right before he was doing his rites to get that like shocked reaction.
Yeah. Friedkin was all about getting not just the right shot, but like the best. And I think
that credit also has to go to the cinematographer.
Oh yeah.
Because people often think that the director shoots the shots, it's the cinematographer.
It's the entire production of having Owen Reutemann, the cinematographer.
Who also did French Connection.
Yes. Which was William Friedkin's previous film that won him the Oscar for Best Director. It also won Best Picture. Gene Hackman got an Oscar. It took the car chase from Bullet and it said, how about we make it even more nerve-wracking? And still to this day, any car chase you see that's worth a damn, you can thank the French Connection. And it's more than likely because of the success of the French Connection.
He was able to do this.
That he was able...
Because I think Batty personally wanted him.
I mean...
Because I think, as he quoted, he wanted like a gritty documentary style feel of the film,
which is what you get. I mean, especially in the opening at the dig.
Yes,
even the moments that are most stylish.
The most stylish thing about the film is the constantly sweeping camera angle people walking.
Other than that,
the film is very smooth.
Yeah, it's something that makes you not only believe that all of this can happen.
And it did.
It's the case of a 14-year-old boy
from in 1949 who Batty was reading about when he was in Georgetown
in Jesuit school.
Yeah,
and one of his professors would tell the story about this exorcism. As anyone can imagine, the Catholic Church is not big on discussing exorcisms, which is funny that for something that they try to brush off as this relic of the past, they don't get rid of the book.
No.
They don't stop sanctioning them, throughout the world every once in a while. Like they still.
I think exorcisms are more prevalent now than they were back then.
I think so.
I think they have to do training.
Yeah. I wanted to look into this. Friedkin was saying on the commentary that just a few weeks before he was recording that, which would have been in 1999, said that the Pope performed an exorcism in the Vatican.
That has to be the most effective exorcism ever to have happened.
If the Pope can't perform an exorcism, I mean, if the whole idea of asking Jesus to step away for a moment and to help you, if the Pope can't get the big guy, then
I can't.
Yeah,
I'm sorry, ma'am. Your son's a lost cause.
Like your child is now Pazuzu. Like you're gonna have to live with this now. This true story was made into this 2000 Showtime
TV movie
called Possessed, with none other than Timothy Dalton
and Christopher Plummer.
That took the St. Louis case
and the diary kept by one of the priests,
and did a pretty faithful job of
as much as you can for a 2000s TV movie.
Yeah, exactly.
Showtime, no less.
Yeah, and what's really interesting is how much visually is borrowed from The Exorcist, because the events are pretty similar.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you're watching, you have to play that back and forth. It not only borrows from The Exorcist, but Possessed would then end up inspiring a little bit one of the prequels to The Exorcist.
Did it?
It has a very similar structure of opening on a battlefield of nothing but desolation, and the priest just wandering around, having to take in the evil perpetrated by man, not Satan, and then having the PTSD of warfare is something that connects Timothy Dalton's priest to Stellan Skarsgård in Dominion.
Yeah, it only came out about 4 or 5 years after.
Yeah. Between all of these, and like not just the prequel and the original and the also inspired by, but then also the sequel, the Heretic, showing this giant battle between, you almost don't even want to say good and evil. It's man and evil. You see this struggle being something, rightfully so, as never ending. For the detective story of the Exorcist, for that angle of finding out why, there's also finding out when does it end. And there is none.
No.
There is no ending. There's no...
This battle may have been one quoted depending on what side you are, but there's always the next one.
Yeah.
And the next one.
Which I guess is maybe a good moment to segue into God Told Me To.
Oh boy.
Because here is literally another detective story where the what is absolutely bananas. And the why is just as unanswerable. And
where do you even start with this one?
Well, this is one we probably need to tell people about, because
no one has seen this movie but you and me.
So God Told Me To. It's made in 1976 by Larry Cohen,
who is very well known for doing police procedurals and exploitation films, mainly blaxploitation films.
Yes. He also did some horror movies like The Stuff.
Oh yeah, that's right.
And probably most famously, It's Alive, which is this somehow even more grotesque take on Rosemary's Baby, minus the Antichrist, add on genetic mutation. And it's brilliant. It's like, what if you turned Jaws into a movie about a mutant baby, but instead of the ocean, it was just the California suburbs. It's really good. So God told me to. So there's a detective played by Tony LoBianco, who's fantastic.
Very similar looking to Jason Miller.
Yes, very clean cut,
Very Italian.
very 70s.
The whole thing is so 70s.
Yeah. And the film opens with LoBianco's character, who's an NYPD detective, handling an active shooter who just starts picking off people.
Yeah, this film is a bit more prevalent today than it probably ever was in 1976.
Yeah.
Kind of makes you pull out your call like, ooh, this is kind of an issue still.
Well, there's a lot of like it's very much the shooter at, what was it, UT Austin
with the clock tower.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And
14 people died.
Yeah,
that's a lot.
That is
an obscene amount.
And so as the shooter, who's just a kid essentially,
he sounds like, he doesn't look like a kid, but he sounds like a kid. He's like 21.
As Tony's character is asking him, like, he's getting to know him right before the guy jumps off the building. When he asks him, "Why are you doing this?" he says,
"God told me.
God told me to." You have what, 3 or 4 more people who say God told me to throughout the film,
including one Andy Kaufman.
Yeah,
before he became Andy Kaufman,
as a degenerate policeman in a parade who starts to just open fire.
I was half expecting him to just start doing the Mighty Mouse thing. Here I come to save the day. And then him ending with, "Thank you very much."
and so what connects all of these people, in addition to
just the randomness of it,
the randomness is the most terrifying part. Right before they say God told me to, or right after,
they said
they die, by their own hand,
or someone else's.
Yeah,
well, not all of them. Some die through other causes, natural causes, or like.
Yeah, the guy in the hospital,
or,
just like,
and Andy Kaufman. I think he was shot, or did he shoot himself? I don't remember.
I think they shot him.
And there was the man who killed his wife and mother. He just went to jail.
Yeah,
many people die in this film.
A lot of people. The body count's high.
Higher than you would think.
What you end up finding yourself in while you're watching this is this hunt for someone named Bernard Phillips.
Mm-hmm. A very generic, simple name, but this weird amount of weight to it. I don't know why.
Yeah. And Bernard was born via cesarean section. And
there was no father.
No father on the...
A virgin birth.
Yes. In 1951. And Tony investigates.
He starts asking around.
And he ends up finding the mother.
In a very subtle homage to Psycho.
Yes.
Because he starts tumbling down the stairs in a very similar way. Whose characters I do not remember. He gets stabbed by Norman Bates and tumbles down the stairs in a very...
Oh, that was Martin Balsam, that.
Okay.
Falling. Yeah.
But he was attacked and stabbed by Bernard's mother.
And then you find out that she was abducted by aliens.
In a very weird sepia tone flashback scene.
Yeah. She was abducted, and then...
If I remember, the abduction, quote-unquote abduction scene, the footage that they use, I think it was ripped from another film.
It probably was.
I think I remember reading that. I don't remember the film, but I think they took that from... I think they had permission to, or maybe it was a film he had done before. I don't know, but...
It's very likely.
The interior spaceship, which you can't really see because it's very poorly comped. 1970s special effects. The movie didn't have a lot of budget.
Yeah.
I think it was ripped from a different film.
The aliens were tampering with people.
Mm-hmm. Experimenting. As aliens do. Because that's all
And
aliens do.
That's all they know how.
That's all they do.
Yeah, it's their nature. And they implanted this genetic oddity of a child.
Neither man nor woman. Very slightly progressive for its time.
Yeah.
Because the doctor's like, I don't know what to, if it was a boy or girl, I didn't know what to call it.
Yeah. And then you come to find out that this child, Bernard Phillips, has a connection with everyone who has done something horrendous in the film, that he is the one who told them to. And in these descriptions,
with psychic powers.
Yes, that there was no need to verbally express any desire. He could just look and instruct people to do this. And as Bernard has described, as walking around the city barefoot,
long hair,
having long hair,
blonde hair, like a woman, having
a certain glow,
yes,
about him. Like whenever you look at him, it's actually kind of blurry.
You know what it kind of sounds like. Kind of sounds like Jesus, minus the beard.
Yep. And when you realize that God told me to is actually Jesus, and that these people weren't lying,
to their knowledge, they thought Jesus told them
they
to.
thought it was Jesus. When really this Jesus
is an alien.
Is an alien experiment.
Who's both man and woman.
Who's just this combination of all of these things put on Earth to do whatever. Who knows? Who knows why?
More experiments. That's what aliens do.
They're just watching him go. You know? And so you go from that, and if that doesn't sound crazy enough, you somehow get deeper into it, because you find out that Tony's character, who was also adopted,
guess what happened to his mother?
You're never going to believe it. But in the same year,
I think it was
it also 50? It was also,
I think it was a different year.
Oh.
I think that one 51, the other one was 59, because Bernard is younger.
That's right. Yeah, the aliens were busy in the 50s.
Yeah.
The entire decade. Yeah. They were just picking up women. They took a woman from Rhode Island,
of all places,
and then brought her to New Jersey,
of all places,
which is maybe the worst crime that could have happened.
Oh no.
You know, and she has no idea. Like, she's just on the middle of a street, in the middle of a road, just naked and just like begging for help, and she doesn't remember what happened. And then she's pregnant, and she gives up the baby for adoption. And it's Tony. And then Tony goes back to the retirement center where he
found his adoption records and tracked her down
using his detective skills
after a really weird romantic scene. Not romantic, but there's a weird romantic subplot that does not go anywhere and isn't needed.
No.
But besides that, regardless.
And so Tony confronts his birth mother and finds out that what happened to Bernard happened to his mother. And of course, his mother doesn't know that this happened to, other people, but, he's putting the pieces together, and he realizes that he's also part of this experiment that Bernard is a part of, and that he's actually kind of special too.
He's part alien? More human than not. He finds this out because we failed to mention a very important thing about the other subplot, which is the secret society.
Oh, yeah.
Where there's like a group of philanthropists, busybodies, businessmen who know about Bernard.
There's just this cabal of the elite, and they want, like, they're part of the Bernard Club.
Yeah.
And they track Tony down.
They're like, Bernard wants to talk to you.
Yeah, they're like, he told us that you need to talk to him. Mm-hmm. And so they're like, you're kind of special too. But they don't tell him how, because they probably don't even They don't even know.
Bernard doesn't tell them everything.
He works in mysterious ways. And so everything builds to this confrontation in this
boiler room.
Yeah.
It's the confrontation number 1.
Yeah.
Where he meets Bernard, and he's just as glowing and hair flowing as they described it.
And you just can't, like, you're trying to look to see, like, did they just put a beard on a actress? Like, what are they?
Nope, there was no beard.
No beard. There's no.
Weirdly looks a lot like David Bowie.
Yeah.
I thought for a moment it was David Bowie.
Yeah. This would have absolutely been like Man Who Fell to Earth era Bowie with long hair.
And David Bowie,
you know,
he can't act.
Just fantastic. But I'm sure they could not afford him.
Ew.
I mean, in 76, I mean, Bowie's doing Station to Station, so like they're not getting him. So they got this person to play Bernard.
Who I think he's went on to do other horror movies, mostly makeup stuff, creatures, feature type things.
But here he's playing Alien Jesus.
He's playing Alien Jesus with the weird vagina chest thing.
Yeah, so there's this moment, as in there are multiple moments, where Bernard is like shirtless for a bit.
He lifts up his robe. He has a robe.
Yeah, he's robeless temporarily. The robe is, he reveals himself, and
right there.
And there's just vagin like there.
It's weirdly moist and pulsating.
It's pulsating. I think the pulsation is the thing that provokes you the most, because at first you're like, is that like a weird mouth? And then you're like, okay. Because it's there, and it's like on the side, and
it's at a weird diagonal angle.
And it's not, for those of you who might be thinking, oh, is that where, first of all, this is Alien Jesus, not real Jesus. So this is not where the centurion took a spear to the, the right side of Christ. No, this is...
this was the left side.
This is the left side of Alien Jesus with a side vagina. So, because Tony is also like him.
They're basically brothers.
They're, a lot closer than you think. And a lot more than you wish. Because by the end, you realize Alien Jesus, Bernard, wants Tony for some
procreation.
For some copulation.
Yes.
For some,
I don't know how it would work. I don't want to think about it. He's Bernard technically.
I guess Alien Jesus is just non-binary.
Yeah.
And
Which for like 1976, that's pretty cool.
It's pretty hip.
I like that.
And
more progressive than you would ever imagine a 1970s police procedural, slightly exploitative film with
science horror.
Yeah, this movie.
It's a lot.
It's a lot.
Which is what makes it so interesting.
It's very
like, this is something where you're like, how the fuck did this get made? But it was. And it's like, if you were to take all of the cop stuff from like Dirty Harry and add the weird sci-fi stuff from
Close Encounter, maybe?
Yeah.
But that was close. That was before
77.
Yeah,
the year before. Who knows? Maybe Spielberg got some from that too.
He watched.
He's, you know what? God told me to make this movie.
It's interesting that we're being a bit more riffy with this, because there's a lot to talk about, but there's not as much to talk about. It's the sublimeness of exorcism. But you need a bit more comedic stuff in your second half of your podcast.
So I guess.
So Tony finds out from his mother, who is the weird not secretary lady, the case lady from Beetlejuice.
Sylvia Sidney.
Yeah.
Yeah.
With the cigarette slit.
Uh-huh.
So he finds out that he's an alien, and he goes to test his powers on a bunch of criminals who had killed a cop earlier. Here comes your blaxploitation bit of the film.
So Tony's commanding officer, his lieutenant, or was apparently involved in like
drugs?
Yeah.
Gang things?
Like, I guess it looked like he was taking a cut.
Yeah, bribes.
For protecting
Yeah.
gang members. And then things start to get out of hand when the city is cracking down and he needs to make some arrests.
Yeah.
And so he offers up some of the gang leader's guys. The gang leader is not happy about that. And so he kills
right inside a stairwell
in
the police station.
Yeah.
Apparently it's really easy to do.
Yeah. I mean, hey, this is 70s. This is what Serpico was talking about. Like this, this kind of corruption that's way out of hand. And so that guy, the
criminal,
one who would look more at home in like Superfly than God told me to. Yeah, Tony just walks up into this pool hole and just
stands there.
He shows his like quasi Jesus powers.
He uses his psychic powers that he just discovered not 2 hours ago.
Yeah.
And
started using them.
Mowing them.
He just makes people just slit their own throats.
Yep. Didn't lift a finger.
Yeah. Then we get the final confrontation.
Yes.
Where the
two meet.
Yeah.
For the second time and final time.
Because
in an abandoned building.
It all blows up.
Yes. So what happens is they have a conversation about like, I don't recall what they were having a conversation about.
It was a one-sided conversation.
Yeah, Tony wasn't really talkative at that time. It was mostly David Bowie.
Yeah.
Not David Bowie talking about what they could do together.
Yeah.
Create a new society of alien races.
Which would start by
them having
the side vagina.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Being a bit friendly. And Tony's like,
he wanted him to know him biblically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But Tony wasn't having that, so he shoots him.
Because multiple times. He shot him. I think he unloaded. But not in the way Alien Jesus wanted him to. and probably because Tony already has like 2 women in his life. He can't handle a third.
We'll talk about that in a minute.
I
know we're going all over the place. This film goes all over the place, so it's fine.
Yeah, it's like your questions are our questions. So yeah, because like Tony is Catholic and Tony is married to Sandy Dennis.
They're trying to get a divorce, I think. That part's unclear. We were talking about the ending. We should finish the ending, and then we can jump ahead to the other bits. So he shoots Space Jesus, and Space Jesus uses his psychic powers to bring down the building. Tony escapes, and then the next scene is him being arrested for the death of Bernard, even though no one would have any idea or even know that he was in that building.
Yeah.
That Bernard was in that. Oh, they could find the body, but that Tony had anything to do with that.
And so, as Tony is handcuffed and being marched up the steps, hounded by reporters,
asking the question,
why did you do it? Out of all the things that people are asking,
which is asked a lot.
Yeah.
I don't think that's how police interrogations and questioning works, but that's fine.
Yeah. And so Tony gets the one question, why did you do it? And then he looks towards the camera.
Literally at the camera.
And says, because God told me to.
And then it freeze frames and he's in a mental institute because apparently we need to know about the faith of this one man.
Because he was told by God. And you might be wondering, but you're part God. You're part alien.
Did
God.
you tell yourself to do that?
Yeah. Yeah. Is he just messing with people?
No one's going to get the inside joke.
No.
He smirks.
He does. He's like, Bernard told you to? Did Bernard tell you to kill him? Is this a moment like Judas and Christ before Bernard and Tony, where Jesus needs Judas to betray him in order to set into motion the birth of Christianity? Could this be?
Could this be the beginning of Bernardism?
Of Bernardism?
No, probably not.
It would require side stuff, So
other things to talk about, because we skipped over quite a bit.
Like the the marital subplot.
Yes, the marital subplot that goes
Nowhere. So Tony has a wife, but before you know Tony has a wife, you know that Tony has a girlfriend.
Yes.
And Tony's girlfriend practically lives with him
In an apartment.
And she is under the impression that he cannot divorce his wife because his wife is strictly Catholic and will have no such thing. You come to find out when you meet Sandy Dennis's character that Tony's actually the one who is holding up the divorce because she has pretty much accepted that they don't have a life together. I think
she knows about the other woman.
Yeah. Like they both know about each other. And apparently when his girlfriend goes up to the police board or whatever.
Yes, because another thing we didn't talk about is Tony got suspended.
Yeah.
Because because the police were withholding the information that this was religiously motivated, all of the murders and attacks. So what Tony does, he goes behind the police's back and leaks it. And this rioting starts happening.
Yeah. There's all of this.
Not the first New York riots, and it will not be the last.
Yeah. No, not at all. These religious riots take over the city, and people are freaking out that God is turning on them. That if God is telling people to smite their fellow New Yorkers, then they might be next, and they can't have that. Because somehow rioting is going to, put a roadblock into the will of God. Because of this, Tony is then kicked off, suspended.
Yeah, there's a hearing, and the girlfriend is, I guess, a character witness.
Yeah, and it's in that moment that we learn that it's been 4 months that Tony has even spent the night.
Yeah, at
his home.
Yeah.
Then later on, there's a confrontation because the girlfriend goes to visit the wife.
Because Tony's been missing for a few days because he's so engrossed in this investigation.
And so the girlfriend thinks that
he's there.
He is there, which is pretty logical.
Mm-hmm.
But he's not.
Not
and
yet.
Then he shows up. And there's both of the women in his life. And
he loves both.
And he doesn't know what to do.
He wants both, but he doesn't want both. He doesn't know what he wants.
Yeah, because he's pursuing the third person in his life now, Bernard Phillips. His life is all about Bernard now, and that just doesn't go anywhere. That's never.
He kisses his ex-wife weirdly in front of
his girlfriend,
and she's rightfully disgusted, and she turns her head.
Yeah, but then they leave together.
They leave, and I think
that's the last
until the climax. I don't know what Bernard and the girlfriend say to each other because of the auto mixing weird in the film. But I guess
we'll never know.
We'll never know. I guess they were going to try to fix this. Then he goes and gets arrested. I understand what the film was trying to do. There are elements that are very similar to The Exorcism. There's that type of... First of all, despite the scripting issues, it's a very well-directed film. Everyone does good performances. It's shot in, I would say, a more documentary style than The Exorcism because it's getting right up into crowds and city panning. There's that element of Catholic faith of the moral struggle of belief and disbelief. It's just the writing.
It's if you remove maybe the alien element.
Yes.
And you leave it to maybe
remove the romantic subplot.
Yeah.
Focus more on because the detective element it's
fine.
Okay. It could be better. It could be more of a solid detective mystery. And there wasn't really much detective mystery in Exorcism, but it was more prominent. Not more prominent. It was structured better. It was more logical and coherent to an actual detective work than what Tony does, because Tony just kind of talks to people, which is detective work. the solution's kind of just given to him.
Mhm.
If you remove the alien bit and the romantic bit, stretch out the more detective work a bit. It doesn't have to be too much, and you focus on the twist, it not being God, but something else, something evil.
Yeah.
It would be a more coherent film and have more connection to The Exorcist than what it does.
I think for me the strongest connection between the two, and also between a number of other religious based horror of this period, is that these are examples of an entire country that has absolutely no idea of what the hell is going on. That by the time you go from The Exorcist to God Told Me To, like in just those 3 years,
Vietnam ended.
you had Nixon resigning, like you have
The faith
that
people had of the country
exactly
was waning.
that is the crux of all of this, is that you have the religious faith that dovetails, because you have the nationalist faith just absolutely plummet, underground, because in 30 years you have the country going from being
golden age.
Yeah, you have
post-war.
Like we go from, quote unquote, the greatest and most powerful country on the planet, to now all of a sudden we just spent a decade in a jungle, and all we got were bodies
That we saw.
Yeah, that we saw on television
in our living rooms with our families.
Like we saw,
which was new.
We literally saw the loss of life.
Unnecessary.
Yeah. No, I mean, we had
on both sides.
You had children watching and learning what self-immolation was because of radical protesting monks, because of the state of the world, that you have these peaceful individuals suddenly protesting what things have turned into by lighting themselves on fire on TV and having these images spread across the world.
The facade of the beauty and mesmerism of America and the American dream faded when we realized, oh, we're not the good guys all the time.
Yeah. It's all of it was torn right in front of us. And you see, definitely more so in The Exorcist, you see all of that misery, all of that pain and suffering and bloodshed literally entering the American home. Like you have the average family household becoming the site of all of this terror. And now nothing is safe anymore. And so to view this and to see a battle between good and evil happening in religious terms, while in the back of your mind being surrounded by the battle of capitalism versus communism, and Democrats and Republicans, and the rise of like neoliberalism, and like everything becoming more and more radical and becoming aggressive and violent. And it's all adding up to a world that is completely different. That for so many people, that hell is on earth. And this battle is not one that can necessarily be triumphed over, but it's one that you endure. And I think that's part of what the Exorcist gets at, is that this isn't something that is necessarily won or lost. It's how long can you keep standing?
Yeah. How long until you're just another body on the ground?
Yeah. And I think there is the glimmer of hope that even after all the bodies at the end of The Exorcist, or at the end of God Told Me To, that there is some structure to what does survive, whether in God Told Me To, whether it's the law itself, because Tony, has been arrested, that the source of all of these random murders
Has been defeated.
Or in The Exorcist, that, you know, even though you have 2 dead priests, a dead director, you know,
You're traumatized. Well, she doesn't remember.
she will.
Yeah, I'm sure.
She will in the Heretic, but everyone else, her babysitter Sharon is traumatized to the point where she does not join the family in moving back. You know, Chris is traumatized. Father Dyer literally watched his best friend die in his arms. But all of these people have to keep living.
Mm-hmm.
And whether it's faith that guides them to do it, or just, I don't know, tenacity.
Sheer will.
Yeah. They do. They do that. They find some joy. The fact that the Exorcist ends with a joke and a friendship.
Depending on what version you see.
Yeah. It takes all of the cross-cutting between moments of blasphemy and moments of affirming that sense of faith.
There is good.
Yeah.
And by all unbelievable means, good will triumph.
Yeah.
Maybe not in
might limp
large ways.
Yeah.
But in the end, there's the good triumphs.
Yeah. That's a pretty powerful message for 2 films that involve, you know, Pazuzu and Alien Jesus telling people to kill people. You know.
Triumph in different ways.
Yeah.
If it's maybe emotional, mental, or law.
Yeah.
Which law's not entirely good or evil either.
Mm-hmm. It shouldn't be. It should be just.
Yeah.
And I think maybe that's more the ending of God Told Me To. It's more a sense of justice, whereas The Exorcist is actually ending with
the glimmer.
Yeah, that this round was won by good. Who knows about the next, but...
And in that case, do you think that God Told Me To is the scariest movie ever made?
Never. I would never think that. But it is one of the strangest.
Yes.
And for that reason, the 2 times that I've seen it, I've enjoyed the hell out of myself both times. And I would more than likely enjoy myself a third time. I think God Told Me To is one of those that like the first time I watched it was by myself. The second time we watched it together.
Uh-huh.
And honestly, I think it's one of those where like you get someone who's never seen it and you're like, you don't know what's about to happen.
You either love it or you hate it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's enjoyable.
I didn't look this up for Exorcism, but do you want to know what Roger Ebert gave God Told Me To?
2 thumbs up.
1 out of 4 stars. Who knows? Maybe Roger Ebert, Siskel and Ebert hated Exorcist 2. Maybe they hated The Exorcist 2. The Heretic.
Yeah. I think it's telling not even the legacy, but the immediate impact that the Exorcist had.
Because it wasn't the first horror movie to win an Academy Award, but it was the first horror movie to be nominated for Best Picture.
And it should have won that year.
Because 1943's Phantom of the Opera either nominated was one for Best Cinematography.
Mm-hmm.
And I was looking this up. There was another horror movie. I think it came out in the 60s.
Psycho.
Maybe. It won for Best Sound. Best Cinematography, I think. But The Exorcism was the first horror movie to be nominated for Best Picture. One of the 10 nominations it received.
Yeah.
It changed the landscape of horror.
Yeah.
Maybe not so much God Told Me To.
Uh-huh. But the Exorcist definitely.
And maybe without The Exorcist we wouldn't have.
Yeah, probably not. Probably not. There are a lot of things we wouldn't have.
We wouldn't have The Omen.
Yeah. Wouldn't have The Sentinel, which we almost talked about.
Yes. Maybe we should have.
Who knows?
In comparison.
Well,
maybe we'll go. We'll get.
God told me to. God told us to put God Told Me To on there. Yeah. No. The Exorcist out of Out of 10 nominations, it won 2 Academy Awards. William Peter Blatty for the adaptation of his script and for
or sound
editing.
Editing is very good. And editing
Bud
can
S. Smith.
make or break a film.
And this is one that it did so.
Very tight.
Yes, absolutely. 73. The Sting by George Rory Hill ended up winning picture and director. Probably as we should have given it to you for Butch Cassidy. And so they gave it to The Sting, which, I mean, The Sting is fun. I mean, anytime, the 2 times that Paul Newman and Robert Redford on screen together,
just dynamite.
Yeah. But The Exorcist,
I don't think they were quite ready yet.
No. Oh, no. See, that's not at all. Like, it's one of those things, like in the 70s, you can see that the films that we can almost objectively say are better are not things that the public needed.
No, because that was when it was all the new age, almost independent filmmaking.
Yeah, like
all the grandiose studio backed productions were gone at this point. The Hays Code was gone.
Yeah, like
it entered a new era of kind of dirty, grungy filmmaking.
Yeah,
most of it not very good.
Yeah,
but some of it with the right minds and right talents, like The Exorcist.
So that's a lot of my favorite stuff comes from the
70s,
that period. Yeah, and like you see like moments, like with the French Connection, doing well at the Oscars, but then you see lighter fare with The Sting, or with Rocky winning, as opposed to Taxi Driver or All the President's Men. Like 1976, Nixon just fucking resigned. Like, nobody wants to see a movie. Not that nobody wants to see it, but like nobody's like gung ho about Deep Throat when that just happened. So the voting tendencies of the Academy are something that always interests me, because of it's not that the best movie is what gets overlooked sometimes. It's just sometimes the award is the best movie for the moment.
Yeah. And at that moment, with reaction of the audience, and critics, which, if I remember, were very high for critics, at least.
Oh yeah,
this was a new kind.
It was a lot. It was a lot.
This is the 70s. People were still somewhat lenient about vulgar content. Like in the 60s, you still kind of had like the Scream Queen type films, monster films.
Yeah, but having a 12-year-old girl masturbate with a crucifix is something that older members of the Academy, they could acknowledge that it was done well in the form of nominations, but to say that like this is the thing that we love, no, we're gonna go with a Depression era set film about 2 gamblers, with Redford and Newman.
I think it's just that idea of like horror being lowbrow in a way, which we still, the 40 odd years after, we're still kind of that way. We're maybe
there are moments of
it just has to be really top notch filmmaking for them to be like,
Silence of the Lambs.
Silence of the Lamb.
The Shape of Water is a quasi sci-fi horror.
Yeah, even sci-fi Academy's not really too keen on. They would not. I don't think. Who knows? Maybe God's told me to, in an alternate universe, won Best Picture.
Maybe
it has horror and sci-fi. Maybe in an alternate dimension, the Academy eats that up.
If they've ever even seen any of Larry Cohen's films, but
someone has.
Someone has. We have.
We've seen one,
and hopefully, people listening, you'll watch them, because maybe God will tell you to.
Hopefully, we've persuaded you. If you haven't seen The Exorcist, you should. It's very good.
You have to.
Or if you like horror, but I'm sure most of you have.
It's Pazuzu.
And if you are looking to kill 90 minutes, God Told Me To is an interesting romp. If you're an Andy Kaufman fan,
yeah, he's in it.
It's his first film role, baby.
Yep.
No shtick. No
Just
fake
gun.
wrestling, just gun.
Just gun.
No bongos, no milk and cookies.
Just death.
It would be interesting to see if Andy Kaufman's career took a different approach and he did serious stuff.
Yeah.
I'd watch it.
Absolutely. So if hopefully you enjoyed that.
If you enjoyed this.
Next week, we're going to be doing, or next episode.
Tell them what we're doing next time.
So for next week's double feature, we're going to do 2 extremely different takes on classic literary monsters. We're doing maybe the most faithful of adaptations of Dracula with Bram Stoker's Dracula.
More importantly, Francis Ford Coppola's
Bram Stoker's Dracula. From 1992. And because everyone needs to see this, because it's a goddamn masterpiece, and I'm not even saying that lightly, Frankenhooker
apparently is very faithful.
It is more faithful than you would imagine, and it is just...
I had suggested we do the Mary Shelley's Frankenstein as an interesting parallel because they both came out in the 90s and they build themselves up to be the sequential version. But we like the idea of doing a more well-known film with the lesser-known film, kind of like the good old classic Dove feature of the 50s and even the 30s. So we've decided to do Bram Stoker's Dracula and Frankenhooker.
Frankenhooker from 1990, directed by, this almost seems too good to be true for anyone who would do a Frankenstein adaptation, Frank Henenlotter. And so we will have these 2 ready for you. And depending on how you feel about this, or the next one, or anyone, whatever your visceral reaction may be, to us, to the films, to anything, at least you feel something.
Yeah. You may not be smelling salt worthy, may not need to revive you. You may not run out your room screaming or throwing up. But a reaction it will be, visceral or not.